I've been camping most of my adult life. I've been through plenty of rough nights. Freezing rain, lightning that felt too close for comfort, raccoons getting into our food, even a sprained ankle deep in the backcountry. But nothing quite matched what happened when my husband and I went out to Death Canyon Shelf in the Tetons. That trip, every single day of it, something went wrong. I wouldn't change it for the world, but it's the closest I've ever come to thinking we might not make it back. We'd planned the trip late in the season. That was a deliberate choice. Fewer bugs, fewer crowds, cooler days. At least that's what we were counting on. The forecasts looked decent. Some afternoon storms, but nothing unusual for the high country. We packed accordingly. Plenty of layers, solid gear, food for more days than we'd need just in case. I'd done parts of the Teton Crest Trail before, but never this far in. My husband had less experience than I did, but he was in great shape and had a strong head on his shoulders. We weren't trying to prove anything, just wanted the solitude and the views. The hike up to Death Canyon Shelf wasn't easy. It was hot, maybe in the 90s, and that kind of dry, punishing heat that doesn't let up even in the shade. We both had full packs. His was heavier. We'd split the gear evenly in theory, but he insisted on carrying the bear canister, the stove, and some other stuff because he felt bad that I was the one who had pushed for the route in the first place. I didn't argue. He's stubborn like that. We climbed steadily, pushing our way past the trees, through high meadows dotted with dry grass and the last wildflowers of the season. The ground was bone dry. Every step sent up dust. The creeks that were marked on the map mostly didn't exist. Just narrow gullies choked with dead grass or rocky washes where water should have been running. About a mile from the pass, the clouds started to build. Big, heavy gray ones that seemed to come out of nowhere. He looked back at me, then at the ridgeline. I could see the worry set in. We were above Treeline now and totally exposed. The sun was still high, but the clouds started closing in fast, and we both knew what that could mean. Lightning was no joke up there. No shelter. Just rock, dirt, and sky. We pushed the pace. He started moving fast. Too fast. I told him to slow down, but he wouldn't. His pack was swaying and bouncing with each step. The sun baked down on us, and we were both sweating like crazy. I sipped my water carefully, trying to make it last. He wasn't. By the time we hit the saddle, I could tell he was in trouble. His face had gone pale and shiny. He was wobbling slightly with each step, almost like he was drunk. We were both breathing hard, but he sounded ragged, uneven. I asked how much water he had left, and he just shook his head. The streams on the map weren't there. I looked ahead, about a mile, maybe a little more. There was a decent-sized creek marked in the basin below. A bold blue line. That usually meant reliable water. I figured if I dropped my pack, I could make it there and back in under an hour. He agreed to stay put while I went. He sat down on a rock, leaned his back against it, and shut his eyes. I left him with a jacket and some snacks. I took both water filters and all our empty bottles and started moving fast. The trail dropped down into the basin. My knees didn't love it, but the thought of getting him water pushed me forward. It was still hot, and I felt every degree of it. When I finally heard the sound of water, it was like a miracle. The creek was running cold, clear, and strong. I dropped to my knees, pulled out the filter, and started filling up everything I had. That's when I noticed movement across the water. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of brown, maybe 20 feet away on the opposite bank, in the brush. I paused. Then I saw it, one small, rounded head. Then another, and another. Cubs. 3 of them. My stomach dropped. Then, behind them, the bulk of their mother. She stepped into the open, not aggressively, just moving through. But she was huge. Heavy fur, a wide frame. Grizzly for sure. I froze, barely breathing. She hadn't seen me yet. I did exactly what I'd learned to do over the years. I stood up slow. I made myself tall. I didn't wave my arms or yell, just started talking loud and calm, letting her know I was there. She saw me almost right away. Her head came up, eyes locked on me. The cubs huddled behind her. My whole body went still. She stood there watching. I kept talking, trying to stay level. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, she turned. Just turned, and started moving off into the trees with her cubs behind her. No bluff charge, no noise, just walked away. I didn't move until they were completely out of sight. I was shaking so badly I dropped the water bottle when I tried to screw the cap back on. I forced myself to finish filling up and then started hiking back. When I got back to my husband, he was slumped forward, barely responsive. His skin was hot to the touch, and his lips were cracked. I gave him a full bottle and forced him to sip it slow. Took a while, but he came around. The color came back. He could walk again after some time, but we had to take it real easy. That night, we camped in the basin, down in a low spot, tucked behind some rocks. No fire. We were too exhausted. We ate cold food, stayed quiet, and just watched the sky. The next day was better. We moved slowly, made our way up toward Death Canyon Shelf. The air was clearer up there. You could see for miles. That's what I loved about it. Wide open space, big cliffs dropping off on one side, long views out over the valley below. It felt like the kind of place that reminded you how small you are. We set up camp on a ledge just off the main trail. It was exposed, but the view was incredible. We could see a thunderhead forming way off in the distance, but it looked like it was going to miss us. We figured we had time. The wind picked up as the sun went down. Started cold, then got sharp. We crawled into the tent, bundled up, and ate a hot meal. I could feel the tension in both of us. Even though we were quiet, it was there just under the surface. Our nerves were raw from the last 2 days. I lay awake long after dark, listening to the wind howl through the rocks. Then came the first rumble. It was deep, a rolling sound that built slowly. Thunder, but it didn't fade. It just kept growing louder until it cracked right over us. Then came the flash, so bright it lit up the tent like daylight. I smelled ozone immediately, that sharp, electric smell that makes your throat tighten. Another bolt hit even closer. The air buzzed with static. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. We crouched in the middle of the tent, trying to keep as little contact with the ground as possible. Sitting on our sleeping pads, knees up, hands off the floor, the lightning kept coming. Every few seconds, the thunder crashed almost simultaneously with each flash. At some point, the rain turned to hail. Then the temperature dropped like a rock. Within minutes, it started snowing. And not just flurries. It was a full-on dump. We stayed like that for hours, curled up, barely moving, hearts hammering in our chests. The lightning came in waves. We counted the seconds between the flashes and the cracks, hoping it was moving away, but it kept coming back. At one point, everything lit up again, brighter than it had all night. I remember thinking, the forest is on fire. I was sure of it. That must be it. The sky outside the tent had gone completely white. We unzipped the vestibule and looked out. It wasn't fire. It was snow. For inches of it, maybe more, had fallen in what felt like 30 minutes. Everything was covered. The ground, the rocks, the tent. It looked like February, not late summer. The light we'd seen was moonlight reflecting off the snow. That's how fast it had come down. It was surreal. The world looked alien, silent and bright and empty. The storm finally passed sometime in the early morning. We crawled out just before dawn. Our boots were frozen stiff. The stove wouldn't start right away because the fuel canister was too cold. We had to warm it under our clothes before we could get water boiling. I'd never been so grateful for hot oatmeal in my life. The snow started to melt as the sun rose, but the cold stuck around. We packed up in silence, just processing it all. We kept going. Every day brought something new. One afternoon it hailed so hard that we had to take shelter under a rock ledge and just wait it out. The ground turned white again, covered in a layer of icy marbles. Another day we found signs of fresh bear tracks not far from our tent. Big ones, fresh enough to make us change our route. One night, I thought for sure we were dealing with the early stages of hypothermia. My fingers had gone numb, and I couldn't stop shaking. We crawled into our bags fully dressed, even our wet socks still on, and just tried to wait it out. But somehow we kept going. We finished the loop. We saw some of the most incredible views I've ever laid eyes on. Towering peaks, endless valleys, fields of alpine grass that stretched for miles. The kind of I've camped for most of my life. Grew up doing it with my dad and later took to going solo more often than not. I've had my share of tense encounters with wildlife. Black bears nosing around at night, coyotes calling a little too close, even one time finding cougar tracks circling my tent in the morning. But none of that ever made me feel the way I do when I hear a branch snap at 2 a.m. and know it's not an animal. I've always been more worried about people than anything else. It was mid-September the year this happened. The weather was perfect, cool nights, warm days, no bugs. I took a few days off work and headed out to a spot I've used a dozen times before, tucked deep in a national forest. It's not marked on most maps, and the trail isn't maintained. That's why I like it. Usually, I don't see another soul the entire time I'm out there. I parked my car at a pull-off about 6 miles from the site and hiked in. The air had that dry, early fall scent, pine, dust, a faint whiff of something sweet from decaying leaves. The ground crunched beneath my boots. I had all my usual gear: one-person tent, sleeping bag, bare canister with food for 4 days, and enough water and filtration gear to be flexible. I brought my GPS, phone, though there's no signal out there, and a small paperback. No firearms, but I had a good fixed-blade knife and a whistle, and I kept bear spray on my hip. The first night was uneventful. I set up camp in the clearing, about 40 yards from a small creek that runs most of the year. My tent faced east to catch the morning light. I cooked on my little stove and ate on a flat rock near the creek. Slept like a log. The second day, I hiked out to a ridgeline I'd wanted to see again. Brought lunch and a filter, stayed out most of the day, and made it back to camp just before sunset. As I was returning, I noticed what looked like a footprint in the dust on the trail, off to the side, headed toward my camp. At first I figured it was mine from the day before, but it didn't line up with the rest of my prints, and the tread looked different. Heavier boot, wider sole. I didn't panic. Could have been a hunter or another hiker just passing through. Still, I walked slower the rest of the way back, ears open. When I got to camp, nothing was disturbed. My tent was zipped, my bear can was untouched, and my gear was where I left it. I made dinner, but I kept looking around between bites. That night, I couldn't sleep. The woods were too quiet. You get used to a certain level of noise, wind through trees, bugs, small animals rustling. But it felt like the whole place was holding its breath. Around 1 in the morning, I heard something crunch about 20 feet from the tent. Just once. Not like a deer moving through. Just one deliberate step. I lay still, heart pounding. I didn't move or breathe hard. The sound didn't come again. I stayed awake until dawn. Day 3, I packed a day bag again and walked back toward the trailhead. Not to leave, just to see if I could find more tracks. About a mile out, I saw them, fresh prints, coming in the same way I had, but newer. Someone else had been on that trail after me. Same boots I saw yesterday. I turned around and headed back to camp. I kept turning around, checking the trail behind me. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling. At camp, I considered packing up and leaving, but I was stubborn, and nothing had actually happened. So I stayed. That evening, I skipped cooking dinner, ate a protein bar, and tucked myself into the tent early. I didn't even turn on my headlamp, just lay in the dark, listening. Around midnight, I heard something again. This time it was closer, slower, like someone trying to step quietly. My breath caught. It was right outside the tent. Then a light, faint, flickering through the nylon. A flashlight or maybe a phone screen, moving side to side like they were scanning. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I had my bear spray in one hand, my knife in the other. Whoever it was stood there for what felt like forever. Then the light went out. I heard footsteps, slow at first, then quicker, moving away into the woods. I waited until dawn before I unzipped the tent. There were boot prints right outside, circling the tent once, then leading off into the trees. I packed up fast, shoved everything into my pack without even bothering to organize it. I didn't eat, didn't filter water. I just started hiking. I took a different route out, a longer, steeper one that bypassed the trailhead. I figured if someone was messing with me, They might be watching the main path. I hiked hard and didn't stop. About halfway down, I turned around a bend and nearly ran into a guy sitting on a rock. Mid-30s, scruffy, wearing a big pack. No visible gear, no stove, tent, or sleeping pad strapped on. Just a pack and a fixed look on his face. I didn't stop, just nodded once and kept walking. He didn't say anything, didn't smile, just watched me pass. I hiked faster after that, kept looking over my shoulder. I didn't stop until I was back at the car 6 hours later. The guy never followed. I didn't see him again. I got in, locked the doors, and drove until I hit cell service. Called a friend, just so someone knew I was out safe. I didn't call the ranger station. What would I say? That someone looked at me weird in the woods? I still go camping, but I'm more cautious now. I don't use that spot anymore. I changed my habits. I let people know exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. I don't stay in one place more than a night. I started bringing a trail cam and a satellite beacon, just in case. Wild animals are predictable. People aren't. That's what scares me most. And the worst part is, I'll never know what that guy wanted or if it was him outside my tent. I'll never know how long he was watching. Maybe he was just another camper, or maybe he was waiting for something. I think about it all the time, and I still don't sleep well in the woods. I've always been the type who prefers the quiet places. I'm not a crowd person, never have been. I like space, distance, and the kind of silence you only get deep in the woods, far from cars and phones and the constant hum of the world. That's why I camp. Not for Instagram photos or some spiritual awakening. I just like being away. I like making a fire and watching it burn low. I like falling asleep to the sound of leaves and wind and nothing else. That's all I ever wanted from it. This happened a few years ago. I was doing a solo weekend trip in a part of the forest I hadn't explored before. Somewhere in the northern part of the state, in the kind of place where the road turns into gravel, and then the gravel disappears into narrow dirt tracks that twist between hills and thick trees. It wasn't marked on a map. I found it through a guy on a forum who said he'd hiked it back in the 90s and hadn't seen another person for 2 full days. That was all I needed to hear. I drove out Friday morning, packed up with enough food and gear for 3 nights. It wasn't a long drive, maybe 4 hours. The last half hour was slow because the road got bad, but I didn't mind. The worse the road, the fewer people who'd be willing to make the trip. I followed the path up through a narrow ridge, parked on a small pull-off where a downed tree blocked the road ahead, and slung my pack over my shoulder. Felt good. It always does on the first day. Clean clothes, fresh air, nothing ahead but miles of forest. The trail I was following wasn't official. It looked like it had been used years ago, worn into the land but overgrown in places. I liked that. It felt more personal, like it belonged to someone who'd lived in this place before me. The first few miles were steady uphill through pine and fir. I passed an old rusted gate, half buried in leaves, and then an open clearing where a few rocks had been stacked into a rough circle. It looked like an old fire ring, long and used. I kept going. By late afternoon, I found a spot that felt right. It was a little ways off the path, tucked behind a small rise, flat enough to pitch the tent, close enough to a stream that I could hear it if I opened the tent flap at night. I dropped my pack, stretched, and started setting up. I kept it simple. 1-person tent, lightweight tarp over the fire pit, food bag tied high in a tree to keep the raccoons away. I cooked dinner early, rice and beans, and sat on a rock while it cooled, watching the light go golden through the trees. Nothing weird happened that first night. No strange noises, no tracks around camp in the morning. It was calm, uneventful, perfect. I went to sleep feeling like I'd finally done something right in life, and I'd still say that trip was worth it, even after what happened the next night. But that second night, that changed how I camp. It started with needing to pee. Not uncommon, not dramatic. Just one of those things you deal with out there. No bathroom, no privacy beyond what the trees can offer. I'd already gone once earlier before crawling into the tent, but I guess the water I drank after dinner caught up with me. It was sometime after midnight, and I didn't want to get out of my bag. It was cold enough that the idea of stepping into the night air made me hesitate. But I didn't have a choice. I fumbled for my headlamp, unzipped the tent, and stepped out. The forest was quiet. Still, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're intruding. I moved a few yards away from camp, ducked behind a cluster of bushes out of habit, squatted, and started to go. That's when I felt it. Not heard it. Felt it. Presence. It's hard to describe unless you've felt it yourself. The air gets heavy. Your back tightens. You suddenly feel exposed in a way that doesn't make sense. Like you're not alone. I froze mid-squat, still peeing, and slowly turned my head. There, maybe 10 yards away, half hidden in the trees, was a cow. I know how that sounds. Not a mountain lion. Not a bear. A cow. Just standing there, still as stone, staring straight at me. At first I thought I was hallucinating. I blinked, leaned a little to the side, adjusted my headlamp, but it didn't move. It just kept staring. Big, dark eyes, wide nostrils, brown and white hide. It looked like something that had wandered away from a farm. But this was the middle of nowhere. There weren't farms nearby, not for miles. I finished peeing and slowly pulled up my pants, all the while keeping my eyes on it. I didn't move too fast. I didn't want to spook it, but honestly, it looked more like it was studying me than about to charge. Like it was confused or maybe just very, very curious. The weird thing was it didn't blink. Not once. Just that long, steady stare, like it was reading me. My skin crawled. There was something unnatural about how still it was. I know cows are herd animals, but there was no sound, no other movement, no other cows in sight. Just this one alone. I slowly backed toward my tent. It didn't follow. It just stood there, its head turning slightly as I moved, watching, judging almost. I zipped the tent shut and lay there for a long time, wide awake, listening for movement. But I didn't hear anything. No hoofbeats, no snorting, just the normal sounds of wind and trees. The next morning, I figured it had just been a fluke, a stray animal. Maybe it escaped a trailer on the highway. Maybe it belonged to some backwoods rancher. Whatever. I made coffee, packed up my day gear, and set off on a long loop through the hills. It wasn't until I came back to camp that it got strange again. There were tracks, hoof prints, right through the middle of my camp. They weren't there when I left that morning. I always look. I'm that kind of person. And now they were everywhere. Right by my tent, around the fire pit, even near the tree where I'd hung my food. Big, deep imprints in the soft earth. But it wasn't just that. There were other signs. My cook pot had been nudged off the rock I'd left it on. One of my extra shirts was lying in the dirt, trampled. My firewood was scattered. Nothing huge, nothing destructive. Just moved, touched, like someone or something had wandered through, poked around, and left. I told myself it was the cow. Probably came back, sniffed around, got bored. It made sense, but it didn't sit right. It didn't feel like random animal behavior. It felt deliberate. The shirt especially, why step on that? Why nose the cook pot but not knock it over completely? And the food bag was untouched. Not even a nibble. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept the headlamp close. Lay there with my ears straining for any noise that didn't belong. And around 2 in the morning, I heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Not running, just walking, right outside the tent. I didn't move, didn't unzip. Just stayed still, heart pounding, listening as it circled once, maybe twice. Then silence. The next morning, I found the tracks again. Closer this time, right up against the side of my tent. And not just one set, 2. That's when it hit me. Maybe it had gone and told its friends. I packed up that morning. I didn't finish the trip. I planned to stay another night, maybe 2. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not hunted, just observed. Like I was the one who'd wandered into their space. Like I'd broken some unspoken rule. On the hike out, I kept checking behind me. Every now and then I'd spot movement in the trees. Not close, not even clear. Just a shadow here, a flash of white hide there. Never more than one at a time, but enough to know I wasn't imagining it. When I reached my car, There were hoof prints around it too. Faint, but there. They'd been there, waiting maybe, or just curious. I drove home in silence, replaying everything in my head. I've camped a lot in my life. I've dealt with raccoons, snakes, even a black bear once. But nothing ever made me feel watched like that. It's funny. People talk about creepy things in the woods. Ghosts, cryptids, weird people. But sometimes the things that unsettle you most are the ones you expect to be harmless. Cow should be harmless. Just a dumb farm animal. But I swear, the way it looked at me that night, it was almost human. I haven't gone back to that area. I still camp, but I'm more careful now. I stick to marked trails. I don't go alone as often. And when I do need to pee in the woods, I check the trees first. I scan for movement. I listen for hoofbeats. I never assume I'm alone, because somewhere out there, I'm pretty sure there's a cow who remembers me, and maybe a few others who heard about it. And I don't know what they think, but I know what I felt, and I'm not going back. I've been camping for most of my life, and I'd done a fair amount of it solo or with just one or two close friends. I never minded the quiet. In fact, I usually sought it out. That stillness you get when you're far away from roads and cabins and other people. It's something I've always appreciated. That's partly why we picked that spot in the Quebec backcountry. It was late summer, August, I think. Me and my friend Jake had planned the trip for months. We didn't want a campground. We didn't want groomed trails, outhouses, or even fire rings. We were after a true backcountry experience, and Quebec had more than enough space for that. Our plan was simple. Hike out far enough that we wouldn't see another soul for days, set up camp, and spend the rest of the week fishing, cooking, and just being out in it. The trail in wasn't really much of a trail. It was more of a moose path, maybe used by trappers years ago, now barely recognizable under the brush and moss. We had to bushwhack more than half the time, pushing our way through birch and pine, swatting mosquitoes and black flies, sometimes following a faint game trail, sometimes just walking in the general direction we'd marked on the GPS. We hiked in almost 9 hours the first day. We crossed a couple of creeks, had to detour around a fallen tree that looked like it had been brought down by a storm, and by the time we reached the lake we'd picked on the topo map, we were beat. But it was beautiful. Remote, still, no garbage, no signs of other campers. Just a small clearing near the shore, ringed with spruce and fir trees. Perfect spot for a tent. We pitched it close to the water, got a fire going, cooked some simple food, and turned in early. The first couple nights were uneventful. It rained a little, then cleared up. We fished the lake, caught a few small trout, cooked them over the fire, hiked around a bit. I spent some time just sitting on a rock, looking out over the lake, not thinking about anything. It wasn't until the fourth night that something felt off. That night, just before we turned in, we saw a couple of flashes far off in the sky. Lightning. A storm was building somewhere west of us. It was quiet though, no wind, just the distant flashes over the trees. We tucked in for the night around 10 p.m., tired from hiking most of the day. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. It wasn't thunder or anything like that. Just a feeling, maybe. I stayed still and listened. The tent was dark, but I could make out the usual night sounds. Leaves rustling a bit, water lapping against the shore, an occasional loon call far off. Then I heard it shuffling, not fast or panicked like a raccoon, slower, more deliberate, like someone walking in loose leaves. I figured it was probably a raccoon or a possum, maybe a porcupine. I'd heard that kind of thing before. I closed my eyes again, but something about the way it moved made my skin crawl a little. It didn't go away. It circled around the tent slowly, stopping here and there, then moving again. I told myself I was being paranoid. Animals move differently at night. It's always a little eerie when you can't see what's making the noise. But eventually it faded off and I drifted back to sleep. We woke up early the next morning. The first thing I noticed was that the air felt heavy, thick with humidity. The lake was calm, and the sky had that color that meant a storm was definitely coming later. I stepped out of the tent barefoot, stretching my arms, when I noticed something on the ground. There were cigarette butts. A lot of them. They were all over the ground in front of our tent, scattered in a loose semicircle, like someone had stood there for hours smoking, pacing back and forth. Some were crushed. Some were still intact, just tossed on the ground. At first, I thought maybe they were old. Maybe someone had camped here before us. But these were fresh. They hadn't been rained on. The ground around them was still soft, not dried out or disturbed in a way that suggested they'd been there for days. I bent down and looked closer. The filters were yellowed but not crumbling, and they were all the same brand. White filters, no logos on the paper, but definitely factory rolled. Not handmade. Jake stepped out behind me and saw the look on my face. He didn't say anything, just looked down at the butts, then around the treeline. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Someone had been standing in front of our tent last night. It was clear as day once you saw the arrangement. It wasn't just that someone had dropped a couple cigarettes while walking by. They were standing there, watching us, maybe for hours. It was probably what I heard last night. We looked for footprints, but the ground was mostly moss and soft needles, so there wasn't much to go on. No boot prints, no tread. Just some spots where the moss was a little more compressed. But we couldn't tell how fresh any of it was. No tracks leading away either, just the butts. 15 or 20 of them. We didn't panic. We were both experienced enough outdoors to know panicking wouldn't do anything. But we didn't feel good either. Not many people smoke unfiltered cigarettes in the middle of nowhere, and even fewer just watch a stranger's tent without making contact. Whoever it was, they didn't want us to know they were there. We talked over breakfast, quietly. Jake brought up the idea of hiking out, but we were deep in, and it would be a long day getting back to the road, even if we moved fast. I didn't like the idea of rushing and possibly getting hurt. We decided to stay one more night, keep alert, and head out at first light. That whole day, we didn't see or hear anything out of the ordinary. We hiked a short loop around the lake, checking for any sign that someone else was nearby. No footprints on the shoreline. No discarded wrappers. No broken branches or markings. It was like whoever had been there just disappeared. That night, we built a bigger fire than usual. It didn't do much to calm the nerves, but it gave us something to focus on. We sat up late, watching the flames, listening. But the woods were silent. Not just quiet, dead silent. No wind, no animals. It was the kind of silence that starts to press on your ears. Eventually, we crawled into the tent. Neither of us really slept. I dozed off here and there, but my body was tense the whole time. I kept waiting to hear that sound again, the slow shuffle, but it never came. Morning came without incident. The butts were still there, untouched. No new ones, no footprints, nothing. It was as if it hadn't happened, but it had. We packed up quickly. Neither of us said much. The mood had shifted. The peace that was there when we arrived was gone now. We hiked out fast, not stopping to eat until we were well beyond the halfway point. The sky was darker by then, and we heard thunder rolling in the distance. By the time we reached the trailhead, the storm was almost on top of us. We made it to the car just as the first heavy drops started to fall. The drive back was mostly quiet. Jake stared out the window while I drove. We passed through small towns, gas stations, familiar roads. It felt strange seeing people again. A part of me wanted to stop and tell someone, anyone, what we found. But what could I say? No laws had been broken. There were no names, no faces, just a bunch of cigarette butts in the woods. In the weeks after, I kept thinking back to that night. What if we hadn't heard anything? What if we hadn't woken up? What was that person doing out there? And why didn't they do anything? That was years ago. I've gone camping plenty since, even returned to Quebec once, but I haven't camped that deep in the backcountry again. Not that far from people. Not with just one other person. Something about that moment. Standing there, realizing someone had watched us sleep all night, changed how I look at the woods. I still love the quiet. I still seek it out. But I listen harder now. I pay closer attention. I don't shrug off every sound. Because sometimes it's not a raccoon. Sometimes it's a person. And sometimes they don't want to be seen. Whoever it was never made a sound, never took anything, never came back. But I think about them every time I zip up a tent. Every time I step into the trees to take a leak. Every time I look up and realize just how alone I am out there. And now, I never go without a second set of eyes watching my back. It was mid-September when I set out on a solo camping trip into the national forest. The days were still warm, but the nights had started turning cold. I'd done a few backcountry trips before, mostly in groups, and felt confident enough in my gear and experience to try a solo weekend. Nothing extreme, just a couple of days about 10 miles off the road in a less traveled part of the forest. I parked my car at the trailhead early Friday morning, locked everything up, and signed in at the register board. My pack weighed just over 30 pounds, including food, water, and my lightweight tent. I brought a GPS and had a laminated topo map with my route highlighted. There was no cell service out there, but I had a decent understanding of the trails and terrain. The first day went by without a hitch. The trail was mostly clear, though I had to duck around some downed trees. I passed one other hiker coming the other way early in the day, older guy, maybe in his 60s. He nodded at me and said nothing. Other than him, I didn't see a single soul. By mid-afternoon, I reached a flat patch of open ground tucked between a creek and a wall of pines. The spot was perfect. I dropped my pack, set up my tent, and spent the rest of the afternoon filtering water, gathering deadwood for a fire, and exploring a little upstream. It was a quiet, empty stretch of forest. No roads, no plains overhead, just wind, trees, and the sound of water. That night was calm. I built a small fire just long enough to cook and warm my hands, then put it out completely. The air dropped fast once the sun dipped behind the ridge. I bundled into my sleeping bag, read a few pages of a paperback by headlamp, and drifted off. I woke up once or twice to owls and small rustlings, but that's normal. You never get total silence out there. The next morning, I took my time making breakfast. The plan was to hike further out, maybe another 5 or 6 miles to a high ridge that supposedly gave a great view of the surrounding valleys. I packed up everything except my tent. Left that stake down since I'd be back by evening. Around noon, after working up the side of the ridge, I stopped for a break on a flat boulder and ate some trail mix. That's when I noticed something strange. A boot print, not mine. I hadn't passed anyone since yesterday morning, and I doubted anyone had passed my tent without me noticing. But there it was, slightly smeared in the soft dirt. Not fresh, but not old either. It was pointed uphill, away from where I'd come. I moved on, not thinking too hard about it. The trail split not far after, and I took the loop that circled west and back down to my camp. The whole afternoon was quiet. Not even birds after a while. I remember that part clearly. It got still, unnaturally so. No wind, no buzzing, nothing. I chalked it up to weather, maybe a front moving in. Back at camp around 5, I noticed something else. The small pile of sticks I'd left near the fire pit had been scattered. That was odd. I hadn't tied them or anything, but they'd been in a neat little pile when I left. Now they were spread out like someone had kicked through them. There were no animal tracks I could see, just that same kind of smeared boot tread near one of the rocks. My tent was untouched, but I felt a shift in my gut, like something was off. That night, I didn't make a fire, just ate a cold meal from my bear canister and zipped myself into the tent early. I lay there awake for a long time, listening. Still no wind, no insects. The forest stayed silent like it was holding its breath. It wasn't fear exactly, not yet, just alertness. I kept my knife close and my boots beside me inside the tent. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard the first twig snap. It was close, 10 feet, maybe less. I held my breath, listening for movement. Another step, then another. Slow, deliberate. Not a deer, not a bear. Bears shuffle and huff and make their presence known, even when they're curious. This was different. It circled half the tent, then stopped. I didn't move. My body was frozen. I didn't even dare grab the knife. The steps didn't continue. After what felt like 10 minutes, I heard them again. Fainter now, moving away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I climbed out and looked around. No footprints, no obvious signs of anything. I circled the camp in wider loops but saw nothing. Just trees, rock, moss, and silence. Felt like being watched, though. Every time I stopped walking, I thought I could hear something stop too. I packed everything. Tent, gear, all of it. I didn't eat breakfast. I just wanted out. It was a long haul back to the trailhead, but I was motivated. I moved fast, drinking as I went and barely pausing. The deeper I got back toward the maintained part of the trail, the better I felt. About 2 miles from the parking area, I passed a tree with fresh knife marks. 3 vertical slashes low on the trunk. Not deep, but deliberate. Someone had cut them recently. I stopped and looked around. I couldn't see anyone. No voices. No other hikers. Nothing. I didn't stop again after that. I jogged the last quarter-mile to the car. When I got there, the first thing I noticed was a piece of string tied to my passenger mirror, hanging down and tied with a slipknot. Not my string. Not from my gear. I untied it, got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I drove for maybe 20 minutes before I finally felt like I could breathe again. When I got to a gas station down the road, I sat in the car with a hot coffee for a long time, watching people come and go. I didn't feel normal again until I got home the next day. Looking back, nothing actually happened. No one jumped out. I wasn't hurt. I didn't see anyone clearly, but something was out there. Someone. I still camp, but I never go alone anymore, and I don't go back to that part of the forest. That was the first time I truly understood that the most unsettling part of being alone in the woods isn't the wildlife. It's not knowing who else might be out there with you. That trip made it clear that not every danger makes noise or leaves a clear trail. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the signs that almost don't seem like signs at all. The boot print, the scattered sticks, the string. It was probably nothing, but I still remember that silence, how heavy it felt, and how long it took for the forest to start making noise again. I decided to head out for a solo camping trip in late October. The cold was starting to creep in, but the woods hadn't completely died out yet. Some leaves were still hanging on, mostly brown and crisp, and the underbrush hadn't fully gone bare. I thought it was the perfect time. No bugs, no crowds, just me, some gear, and a patch of forest up north I'd only hiked through once before. I drove up from the city and parked at a small lot near the trailhead. It was one of those lots where you leave a note on your dashboard with the date and your expected return, just in case something goes wrong. I scribbled "back Sunday evening" on a scrap of paper and tucked it under the windshield. There were no other cars. I took that as a good sign. I wanted quiet. I packed light. 1-person tent, sleeping bag, pad, stove, water filter, dry food, first aid kit, flashlight, bear spray. I had my phone, but I didn't expect service. I always carried a map and compass anyway, and I made sure to tell someone where I was going before I left. I had done this enough times to be careful. The first few hours on the trail were peaceful. It was colder than I expected, but I warmed up fast from the walking. The trail wasn't marked well, just old blazes on trees here and there. A lot of them were faded or missing. I relied on the map more than usual. After about 8 miles, I veered off the trail onto a ridge I'd marked beforehand. It overlooked a wide, shallow valley, and from what I'd read online, it was rarely visited. The terrain was rough. No established campsite, which was what I wanted. By late afternoon, I found a spot flat enough to pitch the tent. It was sheltered on one side by a big rock face and open on the other with a view of the valley. I could hear a creek running down below. I spent some time collecting firewood, though I didn't plan to make a big fire, just enough for warmth and comfort. The wind had picked up, and the sky looked like it might rain later. The first night was uneventful. I sat by the fire, ate freeze-dried chili, then climbed into the tent. It was cold. I could hear wind rushing through the trees, but it was a steady sound, not the kind that keeps you up. I slept on and off but stayed warm in the bag. I didn't hear anything strange. In the morning, the woods were silent. No birds. That wasn't unusual this time of year, but it always feels eerie when everything is that still. I boiled water for oatmeal and coffee, then packed a small day bag and hiked down into the valley. The descent was steep, and the forest was thicker down there. Lots of fallen trees and rotting branches underfoot. Everything smelled damp and old, the kind of smell that sticks in your clothes. About an hour down, I hit the creek. It wasn't wide, maybe 4 feet across, but the flow was strong. I followed it upstream, where the water curved through rocks and cut a path through a mossy patch of forest. I saw animal tracks in the mud, deer, maybe something else. I kept walking until I found a quiet spot to sit. I didn't see any trash or signs of people. It felt like a place no one had touched in years. After lunch, I turned back. I took a slightly different route on the return to try to avoid the steepest part of the climb. That's when I found something I didn't expect. About halfway back up, I came across a tree that had been cut. Not broken or chewed, but clean cut, about 5 inches thick. The wood was pale and fresh. There were shavings on the ground, slightly damp from the air, but still clearly recent. It wasn't a sapling. It would have taken a solid blade to get through that clean. I looked around and didn't see any other signs of cutting. Just that one. I stood there for a while, listening. The forest was quiet. It's not illegal to cut trees out here, technically, but it's rare, especially that deep off-trail. No campsites, no roads. Whoever did it came far for no obvious reason. That stuck in my head as I kept climbing back up to camp. That night, I couldn't sleep as well. The wind was louder, kept shifting directions. I thought I heard branches breaking somewhere down the ridge. I turned off the headlamp and just lay there, listening. Nothing definite. No footsteps, no breathing, but still I didn't feel alone. I told myself it was animals, deer, raccoons, maybe even a bear, but I kept going back to that cut tree. It didn't make sense. One tree, cleanly cut, no other signs around. Not for firewood, not for trail clearing, just gone. The next day I stayed close to camp. I walked the ridge, looked for other signs. Nothing. No trash, no footprints, no gear. But late in the afternoon, I found another tree, cut the same way. This one was about 50 yards from camp, downslope. The same angle, the same type of cut. Clean, sharp, recent, no tool marks around it. That rattled me. I decided not to stay another night. I packed what I could before sunset, left the fire pit cold, and planned to hike out first thing in the morning. I didn't want to navigate the dark, and I wasn't in real danger yet. I just felt like something was off. That night was worse. Wind was still going. A few times I thought I heard steps. Not close, just far enough to make me doubt them. Crunching, slow, spaced apart. I didn't leave the tent. I just lay there holding the bear spray. I got up before dawn and packed in silence. Everything was damp. I forced down a protein bar and started hiking back. The trail felt longer. The woods looked the same, but my mind kept racing. Every tree looked like it might be the next one to show a cut. Then, maybe 2 miles from the lot, I saw something that stopped me cold. On the uphill side of the trail, just beyond a bend, a tarp was draped over something. Camouflage pattern. It blended in almost too well. It was pegged down with rocks on the corners, like someone tried to keep it hidden. I stood frozen. There were no markings on it, no gear beside it, just the tarp. No fire ring, no tent, just that. I didn't go closer. I don't know what was under it. I didn't want to know. I kept moving. I walked faster, not quite running, but pushing my pace. The woods were dead quiet. When I got back to the car, the note on my dash was gone. It had been picked up, maybe by wind, maybe by someone else. I checked all my tires. I checked the back seat. Everything looked fine, but I drove fast down the gravel road until I hit pavement again. I didn't stop until I hit a diner an hour away. I sat inside for a long time, just drinking coffee and watching the window. I didn't go to the police. I didn't tell anyone. I felt stupid. Nothing had happened. Nothing I could prove. Just some cut trees and a tarp. But it was the feeling that stuck with me. Like I was being watched that whole second night. Like I had walked into something I wasn't meant to see. That trip changed how I camp. I still go, but I don't go solo deep off-trail anymore. I stay closer to known areas, places where other people are likely to be. I keep my phone charged. I don't ignore things like cut trees. Whatever was going on out there, whether it was someone hiding something, living rough, or worse, I don't want to know. I got lucky. I left before things turned bad. I'm not going back to that ridge. Not ever.